The familiar galactic courtroom hummed with its usual cacophony of interspecies activity. Translators buzzed, atmospheric regulators hissed, and various beings shuffled, slithered, or hovered toward their designated places. Today's case seemed remarkably mundane by galactic standards. Arthur Pendleton, a human from Liverpool, charged with interstellar noise pollution for singing too loudly through a three-dimensional broadcast when celebrating his hometown football team's victory. Sarah Jenkins, the newly appointed and already exhausted public defender, squinted at her datapad, trying to make sense of the security protocol for this seemingly minor case. Her eyes kept drifting to Bailiff Grognak, a massive Cthar creature whose natural chitin shell was barely visible beneath an absurdly heavy personal energy armor. The suit whirred and clanked with each laborious movement, cooling systems humming ominously, status lights blinking in patterns that seemed to indicate everything from fully operational to uncomfortably warm in the lower appendages. Is all that really necessary? Jenkins whispered to her assistant, a spindly Arcturian with too many eyes and not enough patience. This is a noise complaint, not an assassination attempt. The Arcturian twitched 3 of its eye stalks in what Jenkins had come to recognize as the equivalent of an eye roll. You haven't been here long, have you? Check the supplementary materials. Appendix 7B. Unexpected kinetic hazards from Terra-origin bipedal mammals. Jenkins sighed and pulled up the file. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through what was now infamously known as the Wave Incident. It had happened just 3 standard years ago. A human defendant, acquitted of some equally minor offense, had become so excited by his vindication that he attempted to initiate what Earthlings called a Mexican wave in the courtroom. The bailiff at that time, a gelatinous entity named Floop, had suffered severe molecular destabilization from the sudden air displacement and collective excitement, even if it came from just one person. Poor Floop had taken weeks to recongeal properly. This incident had led to the first minimum physical protection requirement for bailiffs in Earth-related court proceedings. The document contained disturbing slow-motion footage of Floop's body rippling chaotically as the human jumped up with arms raised. Jenkins felt slightly nauseated watching the gelatinous bailiff partially splatter against a nearby railing. Court is now in session, announced the clerk, a crystalline being whose voice reverberated through the chamber by the vibration of its facets. All rise for the Honorable Judge Zorp. The judge's chamber filled with swirling purple gas as Judge Zorp manifested himself. The gaseous magistrate was contained within a specially designed transparent bench that allowed him to maintain his preferred state while still presiding over the courtroom. Jenkins noticed that the judge's gas seemed particularly agitated today, swirling in tight, anxious patterns. His voice, transmitted through the bench's speaker system, had a distinct nervous quaver. Bailiff Grognak, are all security protocols active? Zorp asked immediately, before even acknowledging the case or parties present. Yes, Your Honor, Grognak responded, his natural clicking speech slightly distorted by the armor's communication system. Energy shields at standard capacity, inertial dampeners online, molecular capture net. Still not sure what that does, but it's green, so presumably operational. Very good. Very good. The judge's gas swirled a bit more calmly. We will now hear case number GX 7729E, Galactic Community versus Arthur Pendleton of Earth. Prosecutor KZZTCHK, you may proceed. The prosecutor, an insectoid being with compound eyes and mandibles that clicked with precise logic, approached the center of the courtroom. KZZTCHK was known for a complete lack of humor and an obsession with technical details, characteristics that made them simultaneously excellent at their job and utterly exhausting to work with. Thank you, Your Honor, KZZTCHK began, mandibles clicking in perfect rhythm with each syllable. The case before us today involves a deliberate sonic assault designed to cause psychological instability among hearing-sensitive species. Jenkins frowned. Objection, Your Honor. My client was simply singing in celebration. To characterize this as an assault is an extreme overstatement. Overstatement. KZZTCH case antennae twitched indignantly. I have prepared 37 detailed charts demonstrating the precise frequency patterns and their correlation with documented negative neurological responses in 17 sentient species. A holographic display materialized, showing waveform analyses, species sensitivity charts, and what appeared to be a complex flowchart titled Potential Negative Emotional Contagion Model. As you can clearly see, KZZ2CHK continued, highlighting various peaks in the audio spectrum. The human's vocalization reached 87 decibels at its apex, with particular emphasis on frequencies between 2000 and 3500 Hz, precisely the range most disturbing to Rigellian tympanic membranes. Furthermore, the emotional content, which our cultural experts have identified as triumphalist gloating, creates psychoempathic ripples that, Your Honor, Jenkins interrupted, this is absurd. My client was singing a football chant. He had no idea it could be heard beyond his immediate vicinity. The interstellar broadcast was due to a technical glitch in his communication device. Arthur Pendleton, a thoroughly average middle-aged man with thinning hair and an expression of perpetual confusion, nodded vigorously from the defendant's stand. I was just happy Liverpool won, he offered helpfully, then shrank back as Judge Zorp's gaseous form swirled more rapidly in apparent alarm at his outburst. Bailiff, containment check, the judge ordered immediately. Grognak sighed audibly through his armored speakers, but dutifully scanned Arthur with 3 different devices attached to his armored forearm. No anomalous readings, Your Honor. The human remains humanly normal. During a brief recess, Jenkins approached Grognak, who was attempting to adjust some clearly uncomfortable joint in his massive armor suit. The bailiff's chitin plates made a soft, rasping sound inside the metal exoskeleton as he shifted his weight. Is all this really standard procedure now? Jenkins asked, gesturing to the imposing armor. It seems excessive for a simple case like this. Grognak's compound eyes fixed on her through his transparent faceplate. You think I enjoy lugging around 60 kilos of panic-grade protection for a human who looks like he'd be winded climbing a flight of stairs? This is bureaucratic paranoia calcified into metal and circuitry. He managed to reach a small control panel on his left wrist and adjusted something that made the shoulder joint hiss and relax slightly. It wasn't always this bad. After the wave incident, we just had basic shields. But then came the disastrous trust exercise. The what? Grognak's mandibles clicked, and what Jenkins had learned was the Kthar equivalent of a weary chuckle. Another human defendant tried to demonstrate cross-species goodwill by attempting what they called a trust fall with my predecessor, who had only standard armor at the time. A trust fall? Jenkins winced, already seeing where this was going. Yes, the human announced, I'm going to fall backward, and you'll catch me to build trust, then proceeded to deliberately fall toward my colleague. Having no context for this bizarre behavior, my colleague naturally stepped back, assuming the human had lost motor control or was initiating some form of attack. And the human fell, not seriously injured, just a bruised posterior and ego. But the Interspecies Security Committee interpreted the intentional fall as simulating a surprise physical attack and mandated Level 3 impact-resistant energy armor and automated defensive response modules. Grognak's armored shoulder whirred as he shrugged. I'm wearing this monstrosity not because I'm afraid he might sing, but because some idiot thought falling onto someone was a friendship ritual. When court resumed, Jenkins noticed a flurry of activity at the prosecutor's table. KZZ2CHK was chittering rapidly with an assistant while reviewing new data on their screens. The insectoid prosecutor's antennae were practically vibrating with excitement. Never a good sign. Your Honor, KZZ2CHK announced as soon as Judge Zorp had rematerialized in his chamber. New information has come to light regarding the defendant's place of origin that significantly impacts our security assessment. Jenkins felt a familiar, sinking feeling. Your Honor, my client's hometown is irrelevant, too. The defendant hails from a location designated as Liverpool. KZZ2CHK continued, completely ignoring Jenkins. Our linguistic and cultural analysis AI has performed an etymological breakdown of this term. A new holographic display appeared, showing the word Liverpool split into liver and pool with various charts and probability matrices surrounding it. The term clearly indicates a pool of liver, explained scifistories. Our AI system has flagged this with an orange-level warning for potential connection to organ-based rituals or liver-derived biological weaponry. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Arthur Pendleton looked utterly baffled. Judge Zorp's gaseous form swirled chaotically, and the panic in his voice was unmistakable when he spoke. Bailiff Grognak, enhance all defensive systems immediately. Activate the particle shields. Enable the inertial dampeners. Deploy the molecular capture net. Grognak, whose armored shoulders had slumped noticeably during the prosecutor's presentation, straightened. Reluctantly, Your Honor, I feel compelled to point out that the defendant is simply sitting there looking confused. I detect no signs of organ rituals kropka. That's because you haven't activated the organ ritual detection subroutines. Judge Zorp's gas was now swirling in tight, anxious spirals. Do it now. Grognak sighed heavily, his chitin plates crackling inside the armor as he adjusted his posture and began pressing various buttons on his wrist console. Lights across his armor changed from steady green to pulsing yellow. Your Honor, Jenkins said, trying to keep her voice calm and reasonable, I can explain what Liverpool actually is. It's simply a city in the northwest of England on Earth. The name comes from an Old English term related to a muddy creek. It has nothing to do with actual livers or organs of any kind. Do you have certified etymological documentation to support this claim? KZZTCHK demanded, mandibles clicking rapidly. Well, no, but it's common knowledge on Earth. Then your statement is merely hearsay and potentially human disinformation, the prosecutor countered. Our AI system has analyzed 1.7 million linguistic patterns across 342 species and determined that when biological terms appear in location names, there's a 78.3% correlation with biological significance. That's because you're including species that literally name their regions after bodily functions. Jenkins protested, like the Galgafrinchans planes of digestive completion. Judge Zorp's gaseous form shuddered visibly at the mention. Please refrain from such graphic terminology in my courtroom. My apologies, Your Honor, Jenkins sighed. My point is that human naming conventions often have historical origins that no longer reflect literal meaning. Liverpool is just a city potentially dedicated to liver-based practices, KZZTCHK interrupted. And given the defendant's demonstrated willingness to engage in sonic disruption, we must consider the possibility of a coordinated bioacoustic attack. As the absurd theory gained traction in the courtroom, the entire focus of the proceeding shifted from Arthur's loud singing to whether his hometown constituted a biological threat. The Liverpool hypothesis, as it was now being called, spread through the justice system's neural network, triggering automated security protocols and risk assessments. Judge Zorp became increasingly agitated, constantly demanding that Grognak activate additional protective measures on his already overloaded armor suit. Engage the quantum harmonic filters, the judge ordered, his gaseous form condensing anxiously at the top of his chamber. System doesn't have those, Your Honor, Grognak replied, his patience clearly wearing thin. Then activate the phase-shifted reality buffers. Those aren't a real thing, Your Honor. What about the temporal displacement shields? The judge insisted. Grognak's armored head tilted slightly in what Jenkins recognized as the Cthar expression of exasperation. Your Honor, with all due respect, you're just naming random, technical-sounding words now. Meanwhile, Arthur Pendleton sat in confused silence, occasionally leaning over to whisper questions to Jenkins, who was fighting a losing battle against both the prosecutor's wild speculations and the judge's escalating paranoia. The actual trial proceeded in fits and starts, constantly derailed by security concerns and procedural complications. Every time Jenkins tried to return focus, to the original noise complaint, KZZTCHK would introduce another tangential theory about human biological hazards or cultural contamination risks. Arthur, who had been sitting uncomfortably on the defendant's standard-issue galactic bench, designed with little consideration for human spinal alignment, had been squirming increasingly as the hours wore on. The bench, optimized for the average physiological needs of 17 most common sentient species, was particularly ill-suited for human sitting postures. As Jenkins was attempting to explain the harmless nature of sports fan enthusiasm on Earth, Arthur suddenly experienced an intense leg cramp from sitting too long in an awkward position. "Ouch!" he cried out involuntarily, jerking his leg forward and clutching at his calf muscle. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. The courtroom security system immediately classified the sudden movement and vocalization as a potential aggressive action, yellow code. Grognak's armor, with its automated defensive response module set to maximum sensitivity due to the Liverpool hypothesis, instantly reacted. Rather than attacking, it automatically deployed a super-adhesive isolation foam designed to encase potential threats. The foam cannon, integrated into the right shoulder of Grognak's armor, fired with a loud pneumatic thump. The white, rapidly expanding substance not only encased Arthur's lower body, but also, due to Grognak's startled movement, sent a small glob arcing through the air toward the judge's bench. Judge Zorp, witnessing this projectile approaching his containment chamber, panicked completely. His gaseous form split into several terrified wisps that bounced frantically within the confines of his bench as the foam splattered across one corner of the transparent material. "Contamination! Contamination!" the judge's voice shrieked through the speakers, now an octave higher than normal. "Biological attack in progress." Grognak, his movements severely restricted by both his cumbersome armor and the rapidly hardening foam that had splashed back onto his lower extremities, attempted to deactivate the defense systems. In his struggle, he accidentally triggered the low-level alert siren built into his helmet. The shrill sound echoed through the courtroom, causing several sensitive-eared species to cover their auditory organs in pain. Court officials rushed in various directions, some toward the emergency exits, others toward emergency response stations, and a few simply in circles. Arthur, now encased from the waist down in hardening white foam, looked up at Jenkins with an expression of profound bewilderment. "I just had a cramp," he said weakly, as if this simple explanation might somehow restore order to the chaos surrounding them. Jenkins dropped her head into her hands. "This is why we can't have nice things in intergalactic law." After 20 minutes of frantic activity, the courtroom was finally restored to some semblance of order. Emergency response teams had dissolved the isolation foam with specialized solvent sprays, leaving behind only a faint smell reminiscent of overripe fruit and burnt plastic. Judge Zorp's gaseous form had been coaxed back into a more cohesive state, though he still pulsed with occasional anxiety spikes. Grognak stood stiffly at his station, his armor now bearing several new warning stickers hastily applied by the emergency technicians. In light of recent events, Judge Zorp announced, his voice still quavering slightly, "This court will now proceed directly to judgment." "Your Honor," Jenkins protested, "we haven't completed the defense presentation or cross-examination. Further prolonging these proceedings presents an unacceptable risk to court personnel and facilities," the judge interrupted. "Regarding the original charge of sonic disruption, this court finds insufficient evidence for conviction." Arthur brightened momentarily before the judge continued. "However, the defendant is found guilty of disrupting court procedures and triggering emergency containment measures. The sentence is a mandatory attendance at the Control of Unexpected Physiological Responses in Interspecies Environment seminar, plus restitution costs for emergency response services and foam solvent expenditure." "But it was just a leg cramp," Arthur protested. "Silence." Judge Zorp's gas swirled agitatedly. "One more outburst, and I'll add contempt of court to your charges. Case dismissed. Court adjourned." With a final nervous pulse of gas, Judge Zorp rapidly dematerialized from his chamber, presumably retreating to whatever private space allowed him to recover from the stress of human judicial interactions. As court officials and spectators filtered out of the room, Jenkins noticed a court clerk delivering a sealed data crystal to a messenger, an urgent internal memo being dispatched even before the courtroom had fully emptied. Later that evening, through sources she had cultivated in the court administration, Jenkins obtained a copy of Judge Zorp's memo to the Supreme Judicial Council. The document described the leg cramp incident as further evidence of humans' unpredictability and danger, citing it as justification for enhanced armor standards for bailiffs. The judge proposed adding a cramp prediction module and automated muscle spasm neutralizer to the already absurd list of required equipment. The memo completely ignored the role of the armor system itself and the judge's panic in creating the very chaos it claimed to be preventing. Instead, it framed the incident as a narrow escape from a potential disaster, recommending that all future cases involving humans include not just one armored bailiff, but a secondary backup with complementary defensive capabilities. 2 days later, Jenkins found herself in a different courtroom, preparing for yet another human-related case. This time, her client was being sued for presenting flowers to a plant-based ambassador, an act now classified as non-consensual bodily mutilation under the recently updated interspecies etiquette code. As she organized her defense materials, she noticed Grognak entering the courtroom. The Cthar bailiff's armor was noticeably bulkier than before, with several new modules attached to the shoulder plates and what appeared to be an entirely new subsystem integrated into the leg sections. "New upgrades?" she asked, sympathetically as he clunked past her table. "Cramp response system," Grognak replied, the electronic filter not quite masking the resignation in his voice. "Plus a Liverpool protocol module that supposedly detects organ-based weapons. It's been scanning my own liver for the past hour and sending false positives to Central Security." He shifted uncomfortably, the armor whirring and clicking with each small movement. "At this rate, I'll soon need an auxiliary exoskeleton just to carry the primary exoskeleton. The technical division is already drawing up plans for what they're calling armor. That's innovative," Jenkins offered weakly. "It's paranoia institutionalized," Grognak corrected. "Do you know what the true irony is? In all recorded incidents involving humans in galactic courtrooms, not a single one has been caused by actual human aggression. Every single security event has been triggered by our overreaction to normal human behavior. Then why don't they just scale back the protocols?" Grognak's armored shoulders rose in a mechanical shrug. "Because admitting you've been afraid of shadows is harder than building bigger flashlights. Besides, the bureaucratic momentum principle. Once a form exists to document a procedure, the procedure can never die." As the new judge, a crystalline entity considerably less anxious than Zorp, entered the courtroom, Jenkins reflected on the absurdity of the situation. Alien judges refused to hear Earth cases without armored bailiffs, not because humans were truly unpredictable, but because their inherent fear, rigid bureaucracy, and misguided attempts to control that unpredictability continually created the very chaos they feared. The armor had become a symbol of their own anxiety rather than an actually effective protective measure. Her new client, a botanist who had no idea that cutting flowers was considered mutilation in some cultures, looked nervously at Grognak's imposing armored figure. Jenkins leaned over to offer what reassurance she could. "Don't worry about the bailiff's armor," she whispered. "It's not because of you. It's because they're afraid of what they don't understand. And what they understand even less is that their fear is the most dangerous thing in this room." The botanist nodded uncertainly, eyes still fixed on the bailiff, who was now attempting to adjust something near his helmet that had begun emitting a high-pitched beep. "All rise," announced the court clerk as another day in the galactic justice system lurched awkwardly into motion, weighed down by layers of protective measures against dangers that existed primarily in the minds of those they were designed to reassure. In the antechamber outside, a team of engineers was already reviewing plans for the next generation of bailiff armor, complete with human emotional outburst containment field and spontaneous dance movement inhibitor grid. The bureaucratic machine ground ever forward, adding layers of protection against increasingly unlikely scenarios, blind to the fact that with each new addition, they only made the entire system more prone to exactly the kind of chaotic failures they were trying to prevent. Meanwhile, in the courthouse cafeteria, a group of veteran bailiffs from various species sat around a table, sharing stories about the most ridiculous human-related incidents they'd witnessed. Despite the complaints about the increasingly cumbersome armor requirements, there is an underlying affection in their anecdotes, a recognition that humans, for all their bewildering behaviors and customs, were not malicious, merely different. "You know," said an older Nithar bailiff to his colleagues, his natural chitin plates showing the scars of long service. "I served for 3 decades before all this armor nonsense began. Know how many times I was actually attacked by a human? 0. Know how many times I've been injured by my own protective equipment malfunctioning? 17. The others nodded in commiseration, raising their diverse drinking apparatuses in a universal gesture of solidarity. Across the galaxy, courtrooms continued to process human cases with increasing levels of protective paranoia, each incident reinforcing the perceived need for more safeguards, more armor, more distance between species that might otherwise, given the chance, simply learn to understand each other's cramps, celebrations, and well-intentioned trust falls. And somewhere in Liverpool, blissfully unaware that his hometown had inspired a galactic security protocol, Arthur Pendleton watched his football team play, carefully refraining from singing too loudly, lest he once again disturb the complex tapestry of interstellar jurisprudence with the dangerous human practice of sports enthusiasm.